Season 4, Episode 2, Family. This is the follow-up episode to The Best of Both Worlds. And it's a pretty mellow episode. There's no bad guy to fight, no life or death situation to overcome. But at the same time, it's a heavy episode. There's a lot of personal drama. It could be Next Gen's most emotional episode. And don't get me wrong, I love it. I think it's a great episode, and I'm happy that they actually had the balls to explore Picard's traumatic encounter with the Borg. Because Star Trek usually hits the reset button after every episode, and we don't have a lot of episodes like this. I almost think of it as a part 3 to Best of Both Worlds, or at least the epilogue to it. But it's been a while since I watched it, and for some reason I thought this episode was going to give me a lot of comedic material to work with, and I'm not sure that it did. I don't know why I thought that. I guess because Picard's brother is in it, and he's such a miserable bastard that I thought he'll be fun to make fun of. And Worf's dad is in it, and he's kind of a goofy guy too. But there's not as much of that as I thought, so I'm a little nervous about this one. I guess we'll see how it goes. And I think I'm going to do things slightly differently. There are 2 main plots, Worf's and Picard's. And I'm going to start with Worf's, just as the episode does. And I'm going to go through pretty much everything with him. And then we'll go into Picard's. And I think we should just get to it. The episode opens up with the Enterprise getting a refit and overhaul after the Borg attack, which makes sense. They're docked in space near Earth. And while the crew is working on repairs, there's also a bit of downtime. And Worf's parents are coming aboard for a visit, his human parents. And he's unaware of this. Riker had to be the one to tell him that they're on the guest list. And Worf is clearly uncomfortable. He doesn't want to see his parents. He's been struggling with his recent discommendation. I haven't talked about that episode yet, but basically Worf has been excommunicated from the Klingon Empire. He willingly accepted this discommendation to protect the Klingon Empire from descending into a civil war with the Duras family. And I guess I'll talk more about that if and when I get to that episode. But it's just something that most Klingons wouldn't do, because typical Klingon honor is not like normal honor. Klingon honor is really all about appearances. If it looks cool and it makes you look cool, then it's honorable to Klingons, essentially. But not Worf. Worf has a much truer sense of honor than most Klingons. It's more internalized. I kind of compare him a little bit to Ned Stark in Game of Thrones in a weird way. The honor is in doing the right thing, regardless of how you're perceived by other people. Protecting your family, even if it means people think you had a bastard son or committed treason. And that's essentially what Worf did. He took the blame and the perceived dishonor in order to protect basically the entire Klingon Empire. Although, because he did this, his descendants will also bear his dishonor for generations, which is fucking extreme, but I guess Klingons are extreme. But back to the episode. Worf awaits his parents in the transporter room. He talks to Chief O'Brien for a bit. He says his mother is never on time. And O'Brien says, well, you know women. Which is a weird comment, right? I don't know, that just struck me as a weird thing for O'Brien to say. It's a little sexist, yeah, but it's also like, it's the guy's mom that you're talking about? Just seems weirder that he's talking about his mom. Almost like O'Brien is dealing with some shit with Keiko or something at home. I don't know what's going on with him. Like he stormed out of their quarters, pissed off, because Keiko wouldn't shut up about her fucking Katarian crocuses or some shit. And now he's taking it out on Worf's mom. And O'Brien also says he understands Worf's frustration with his parents.
Last time my old man was on board, I found him chasing Nurse Stanton around a biobed in sickbay.
I'm not concerned about my father chasing nurses.
But it's always something with parents, isn't it?
So, O'Brien's dad is a convicted sex offender. Good to know. And yeah, O'Brien, it is always something with parents. But not that. That's something else entirely, I think. Anyway, Worf's parents finally beam aboard. Sergei and Helena Roshenko. Sergei was once a chief petty officer in Starfleet, and he discovered Worf after his parents were killed by the Romulans during the Khitomer attack. He took him in, and raised him with his wife Helena. And Sergei marvels at the Enterprise. He loves it.
Yes, I want to see everything, the whole ship. At home, I have all the specs and diagrams of the Galaxy-class starships.
What a nerd. And basically, Worf's parents are here to just try to support him in any way they can. They heard about his discommendation, but they don't really understand it. They just know that their son is struggling. And it takes them a long time to even broach the subject, but eventually they do. They go see Worf while he's trimming his beard in his big chair made out of giant balls. And Worf finally embraces them and he says he's glad they came. And they say whatever happens, they're proud of him and that they love him. It's a really nice scene, and if you're a sap like me, you might even feel the waterworks coming on a bit. Helena has a frightening look on her face. You're not imagining that, but we'll let that slide. Nothing to be concerned about. And that's basically it for Worf's story in this episode. It's a nice little reconciliation with his parents. So we'll switch over to Picard now. And he is preparing to head to his home village of Le Bar, France. First time in almost 20 years. He assures Troy that he's completely recovered from his encounter with the Borg, which we know isn't true. It's impossible for it to be true. And it's surprising that he's even been restored to active duty. Seems like this would take a long time to get over. But we have a show to do, so he has to be back on duty. But at least he gets a vacation first. He beams down and decides to walk to his old house where his brother Robert and family live. And just to be clear, I'm going to refer to Jean-Luc Picard as Picard, even though almost everyone he interacts with in this episode is also Picard. I'm just going to use his last name and their first names. And he meets up with his young nephew, Rene. And it's probably the first time he's ever met the kid, if he hasn't been home in 20 years. I mean, Robert doesn't seem like the type of person who would take his young son to visit his brother on a starbase. And Picard says Rene looks exactly like Robert did when he was his age. Which can't be true, because Rene looks exactly like Picard. We know this because it's the same actor that played Picard in Rascals. What a disaster that episode is. Anyway, he eventually meets up with Robert's wife, Marie, who is played by Samantha Eggar, who I recognize from the David Cronenberg movie, The Brood. Check that out sometime if you want to see some weird shit. And Picard marvels at how nothing has changed. He says every tree, every bush seems untouched by the passage of time. But I guess he must have gotten sick of it after a while, because when he took over, he changed a lot of shit. Then again, maybe the changes came after the fucking fire that eventually consumed Robert and his family. God, why does Star Trek always have to ruin a perfectly good thing? And Picard finally meets up with Robert, who is tending to his grapes. And when I say tending, I mean shoveling them into his fucking mouth like a demented squirrel. And it's a cold welcome, to say the least. Robert doesn't even stand up to greet his brother. Which, it would have been nice if he did that, because it looks like Picard had to walk through about a mile of fucking grapes to reach him. I mean, it's an insane amount of land they live on. And Picard spends the majority of the time butting heads with Robert. He also meets up with an old friend named Lewis, who offers him a position with some kind of underwater research project, which Picard only briefly considers. It's kind of funny how many would-be careers that Picard had. Archaeologist, marine biologist. He basically had the aspirations of an 8-year-old. And by now you may notice that everyone in France seems to be English. It's not just the Picards. It's Lewis now too. I can't explain it. I guess the UK conquered France at some point. That's the only explanation I can think of. And Picard and Robert continue to argue. This time it's about technology, of course. And Robert says life is too convenient. I mean, Jesus. He's such a Luddite. He would have been happy in the fucking Blitz, wouldn't he? He would have been happy in the Dark Ages. As long as he could make his fucking wine and shove grapes into his mouth, Robert Picard is a happy man. I don't even know how he got married. His wife is a delightful person. What does she see in Robert? I don't get it. And he also wants his son to live the same sheltered life that he lives. It's really bizarre. And eventually Picard and Robert have a drink together. And Robert finally asks him about what happened to him up there with the Borg. He assumes that he was humiliated, and he says that he could use a little humiliation. Picard walks away, Robert follows, and their argument reaches a boiling point. Picard punches Robert, and they roll around in the mud for a while, before laughing at how ridiculous the situation is. And then Picard finally breaks down about what happened to him.
Used me to kill and to destroy, and I couldn't stop them. I should have been able to stop them. I tried. I tried so hard. But I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough.
That's heavy stuff. I can't even joke about it because it's just so good. It's an amazing scene. But I will joke about what Robert has to say in reply.
This is going to be with you a long time, Jean-Luc. A long time. You have to learn to live with it.
I mean, he's blunt as ever, isn't he? He's not wrong. It will be with him a long time, probably the rest of his life. But he's just so blunt about it, and there's not a lot of empathy in how he says it. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. You can live with it under the sea with your buddy Lewis, or in the stars with the Enterprise. But you can't live with it here. Get out. But despite that, Picard is grateful. He thinks he came back home so Robert could help him. And Robert responds with, "I still don't like you, Jean-Luc." So tender. And then they get shit-faced and track mud through the house. Actually, it seems like they tracked mud through the house and then got shit-faced because they weren't drunk before the mud. It's a bit of a dick move. And you know Robert is too much of a Luddite to have a 24th century Roomba, so I don't know what the hell they're going to do about this mess. But whatever. Picard says his goodbyes, and this is a scene where you could finally see that Robert actually does love his brother. It would be nice if he could actually say it, but I guess we got to take what we can get from him. And Picard beams back to the Enterprise and briefly meets Worf's parents on their way out. And Sergei once again gets nerdy.
You had the full tour, I trust.
Well, actually, there's still a few areas because of the repairs.
Sergei, it's time to go.
Yes, yes. Yes, okay. I have all the specs and diagrams at home.
I love Sergei. He's basically us. He's a Star Trek fan. How can you not love him? And the episode comes to an end. Well, not quite. There is a third plot line that is very brief. I didn't even talk about it. It deals with Dr. Crusher giving Wesley a holographic recording made by his father, Jack. There's not much to say about it. It's a nice scene where Wesley gets to hear his father talk to him. But like I said, there's not really much to go into about it. It probably takes less than 5 minutes in the whole episode. So I'll just leave it at that. Overall, I think it's a great Star Trek episode. It adds to Picard's character, it adds to Worf's character. And you know, some of the best Star Trek episodes are just a few people sitting around talking. Doesn't seem like that should work for Star Trek. But when you have good writers, anything's possible. And new Star Trek just doesn't do episodes like this. They just don't. Granted, I haven't seen everything, but I'd be very surprised if they did an episode like this on Strange New Worlds or Discovery. Maybe I'm wrong. But they certainly haven't done it on Star Trek Picard. Because every new episode needs a certain amount of action and goofy quips. And I don't know how you can feel like Star Trek hasn't lost a little something when you watch an episode like this now. That's just my opinion, of course. And that's all I got for now. You know, thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought of this one. And until next time, take it easy.
Yes, okay. I have all the specs and diagrams at home.